Chapter 20. Cora. The organisation of the hunt was fascinating to Cora. A good number of the surrounding gentry also joined the hunting party. The gamekeeper, dressed in a brilliant red coat and black velvet hat, directed the beaters, shooters and hounds with the precision of an army commander. What Cora wouldn't give to wear jeans that day. The men had the luxury of pants tucked into their hessians, while the ladies' mud-covered skirts swung heavily around their boots. They hunted close to paths and roads to ease the women's movement. Knee-high grass and way too much skirt proved noisy to navigate, frightening away the game. The beaters, driving the rabbits before them, appeared in the field soon after the shooters were set up in a long stretch of a line. Then they were sent off to another field as the shooters began. Finally, the pickers and hounds retrieved the fallen quarry. At the end of the day, Simon reported that they had bagged more than 300 rabbits. The hunters celebrated and congratulated each other. Cora was sick. There was no way that the rabbits' lives would not be wasted. It hadn't been apparent to her how much had been taken since the shooters moved on to the next field before the pickers and hounds had all the game recovered. She resolved that today was her first and last experience of Victorian-era hunting. The guests chatted around her, but Cora withdrew. How could Simon knowingly put her in this position? She felt betrayed. The hunting party regathered at the carriages for the ride home. As he did when they had come to the fields that morning, Simon sat across from her. Different from that morning, she ignored him, pointedly. She wanted to chew him out, but would hold her tongue until other people weren't around to give them an audience. When she glanced past him, she saw concern. She wondered if he wanted to say something as badly as she did. It had better start with, "Please forgive me." Simon lingered as the women were handed out, then extended his arm to Cora as they walked toward the house. He veered off to a flower bed with an iron bench. "Are you upset with me?" His voice was low, and his eyes darted around to see if anyone else idled in the area. There was no one. She took a deep breath and blew it out between her pursed lips to calm her voice. Every bump and turn in the carriage had annoyed her, adding to her already agitated mood. "Of course I'm upset with you," she hissed. "More than 300 rabbits for a group that's less than 30? We'd each have to eat 10 rabbits. You knew my rules for hunting. I wish you'd warned me. I wouldn't have come." "Why would you expect to eat 10 rabbits?" Cora stood and threw her hands in the air. "Exactly! I wouldn't!" She stomped toward the front entrance, then back toward him as he rose from the bench. "And neither will anyone else at the house party." Barely restraining herself from poking her finger into his chest to punctuate each word, she said, "That is my point." Instead, she walked away without looking back. She kept to her room for tea time and for dinner, requesting that a tray be delivered with only rabbit. So many things seemed right about living in this century: slower pace, appreciation for culture, music and history, and Simon, who made all of those things more important. But many things didn't fit. Women's fashions that were generally ruffle-covered torture devices, education, civil rights, hunting practices. Perhaps the longer she lived here, the less intrigued she would be by the experience. That's all it was supposed to be. An experience, not a commitment. The sky was tinted dark when May came into her room. "We missed you at dinner. I had a lot to think about. Anything important?" May flung herself into the green-striped chair by the hearth and popped one leg over the overstuffed armrest. Cora thought that if May weren't wearing miles of silk, she would look just like a college roommate. Cora supposed that in May's other century, she probably had roommates too. "Just unraveling the mysteries of the universe." "Oh, just that. Well, don't give it too much time. Fuzzballs don't unravel." "I thought time was the fuzzball," Cora quipped in return. "The universe is time." May turned toward the window. "We look at those stars. Their light has been traveling for 1,000,000 years, and yet we see it now, at this time. We're looking very far into the past. Both times exist together in the universe. Anyway," May stood to leave, but fished her hand down her cleavage, withdrawing a letter. Simon thought I could get this to you. Thank you. I felt a bit like an English spy carrying secret documents for the war effort. She handed it to Cora. Will you go with us tomorrow? We're hunting red grouse. It's the opening day. I don't think so. She was fairly certain the answer was no, but she didn't care to say so yet. When May left, she slid her finger under the wafer and opened the letter. The salutation made her gasp. My love, I am terribly sorry. Simon. P.S. I should have explained the hunt to you. I had no idea it was so different in England than you would have experienced in America. Our family's estate is large and has many people dependent on it for their lives and income. Perhaps it is not so at your home. Nevertheless, the rabbits taken today will benefit many beyond the stones of Leavensfield. Some were dressed and packed in the ice house to be used later. The rest were delivered to the homes round about to be eaten by dozens of families, many in great need. The hunt seasons feed more than the souls in my home or even my employ. It is a rare time of plenty for those who might live very modestly otherwise. Even a few lucky hounds will feast too. Some rabbits were dressed out for dinner this evening, a rabbit fricassee, a rich, tender meat resting in a creamy mushroom sauce, my favourite meal. I asked cook to save you some in the larder in case you felt well enough to eat later. If you decide not to come down before the clock strikes 11, I shall have no choice but to eat it myself in honour of one of your own hunting rules. I think I shall be at the door to the kitchen garden precisely at 10:55, should you wonder. Cora looked at the clock. Only 10 minutes from now. There wasn't time to call for any help to dress, and it probably wasn't advisable to let anyone know that she was running off to meet with him anyway. She dug through the wardrobe, finding the gown she'd worn when she'd been transported back in time. Although it resembled an authentic 19th century gown, but more Regency than Victorian, it had a zipper. She could dress herself. After putting on her shoes, she caught her reflection in the mirror and tugged the pins out, and then ran a brush through her hair. She pulled the sides up and pinned at least that much in place, then eased open her door and checked to see if anyone was in the hallway. Clear. She left and closed the door, but instead of turning to go down the formal staircase, she turned the other direction and headed for the servants' stairs. She hurried down 2 flights, her slippers tapping out a staccato beat as she ran, only startling a maid and a footman in curiously tight quarters and meeting no others. Was she in time? If not, she had no idea where to look for a larder or even precisely what one was. Cora wondered if she could just wander around and discover where Simon was. That wouldn't look suspicious or anything. When she entered the large workroom adjacent to the kitchen, Simon stood next to the doorjamb, holding several plates, the top one heaped with food. In his other hand, he held a large bowl covered with a small plate. You're late, so I retrieved the rabbit anyway. You have a few plates there. I was expecting company. With a tip of Simon's head, Cora followed him to the wooden table that served as workspace during meal prep, where he motioned her to sit. She did, and he set plates and silver out for them to use, then served her a quarter of rabbit. From the very first bite, Cora appreciated Simon's praise for the dish. In fact, he might have understated its merits. The fast food of her century paled against the hearty, savoury foods in this. Even restaurant dishes lacked the complexity and depth of these. With the last mushroom and the last bit of sauce eaten, he removed the plate from the top of the bowl. Dessert? He asked, tipping the bowl slightly to show the contents. Cora had no idea what was in the little crocks at the bottom, but anything under the fluffy whipped cream would be fine with her. She looked to Simon to fill in the answer. Almond pot de crème, he said, carefully lifting a shallow bowl and holding it in front of her. Oh, custard! It smells wonderful. Simon dramatically covered Cora's mouth with his hand and glanced around the kitchen with a look of fear on his face. My French cook would deny us the pleasure of these little pots of wonderful if he heard you call it custard. Not a very French term, you see. Cora widened her eyes and nodded empathetically, picking up her spoon. Simon placed a small pot in front of each of them. As with everything she'd tasted here, the dessert wasn't as sweet as its modern counterpart, but maybe her tastes had changed. The almonds and cream were the featured flavours instead of sugar. She much preferred the clean taste. When they were finished, Simon disappeared briefly into the kitchen with their dishes and returned. You missed Everett's announcement at dinner this evening. Cora felt the rush of excitement. He and Lucy are engaged? Yes, they plan to marry in a month. Her mother has some shopping to do and won't allow it earlier. I'll bet he was disappointed. Simon nodded and Cora added, but maybe not more than Lucy. I believe you're right. He took a drink of wine. With some uncertainty in his voice, he asked, Will you hunt with us tomorrow? Cora did the same as she stalled for time. She'd made assumptions and blamed Simon for her conclusions. Yes, I'm sorry I didn't understand. I should have asked. I judged you poorly. I could forgive you for that last spoonful of creme. Simon pointed his spoon toward her bowl, but she quickly scooped up the dessert with her own spoon. A mixture of surprise and disappointment crossed his face, followed by a deep laugh. It felt good to laugh beside him. Very good. That's a fair deal. I'll take it. She lifted her spoon to his lips. His hand covered hers, and he smoothly returned the spoon back toward her, saying, I couldn't extort that last bite from you, but I'll accept your apology. Cora knew Simon was deeply principled, even when he was playful. He was a good man. The spoon dropped into her crock only a second before her lips met his. She swung her legs over his lap, and he deepened their kiss. Her head swam with excitement, a sort of dizzy pleasure. Did he feel the same? After several spine-tingling moments, Cora felt him take a deep breath and lean away. Having you in my home has touched me deeply. I look forward to seeing you each morning, spending as much of the day with you as I can contrive, then ending the day with you again. Only one thing is lacking to make me the most happy man. Simon gently moved her legs and then slid to the floor on one knee. He wouldn't. Part of her ached to hear words of love and commitment to a lifetime spent together. Another part still clung to her life, her real life. He reached for her hand. He's going to do this. Now, that's what this is. Stop! You can't! I don't know if I'm staying or not. He had no idea who she was really, and how was she supposed to tell him? He couldn't propose. You'll ruin everything. Cora jumped from the bench and ran. At the kitchen door, she turned and said, We won't talk of this tomorrow. We'll have breakfast and go hunting. That's all. She didn't even pause as she turned the corners while running up the servants' stairs. She panted before the door to the rose room. Why the big panic? But she knew. She was being chased by her own indecision, her own doubts. Why didn't she just hear him out and explain that she wasn't ready to consider the question? Her hand rested on the doorknob, but she didn't turn it. His face had turned up toward hers, with such love in his gaze, gentleness in his smile. The tenderness in the mere touch of his fingers on hers still flooded her senses. The simple answer might have been that she was afraid of breaking his heart, that she had to run far from it. However, the fear bubbling up from the truth was far more threatening in that moment. She ran from her own intense desire to say yes. Her whole body felt weak. She would go to bed, but she knew sleep wouldn't come. She had to decide what to do. She turned the latch and pushed on the door to her room. A single candle's light guttered from the breeze it made as it opened. Lady Atkins sat on Cora's bed, her arms across her chest. She unfolded and stood. I've been waiting for you. Cora tensed and kept silent. She could take her. She didn't trust Lady Atkins and stayed wary of her. "I've been wanting to have a little chat with you for quite some time now." "Maybe you should have extended an invitation instead of entering my room unwelcomed." Cora could feel her muscles ready. "Oh dear, we are starting off on the wrong foot." Cora noted the smirk on the woman's face, hardly repentant. "I'd say, you can leave now." Cora stepped away from the doorway. As Lady Atkins walked past, she said, "Simon might sneak off to the kitchens with you at midnight, but he'll only dally with you before casting you aside. Men like him don't marry women like you." She pulled the doorknob behind her, then stopped. "I have an agreement with his family. He's only playing with you. It's pathetic, really." Then she stepped into the hall and slammed the door. What a viper! Cora knew the man Lady Atkins claimed to know well enough to marry, and that man would never propose to Cora if he had a previous agreement. His honour meant too much to him. At breakfast the next morning, Cora noticed Simon appeared to have gotten as little sleep as she did. He was somewhat quiet, but often glanced her way. She knew because she was doing the same. May and Everett had puzzled looks, as their attention was often on the couple, too. Before heading to the fields, Simon announced, "Much of today's bag will provide a feast for the marriage celebration for a daughter of one of the estate's retainers this evening. We will provide an evening of cards here, but if any would like to attend the wedding party, you are welcome." The hunt went much as the previous one had. Cora was pleased that today's sport would provide the happy start for Nanny Kate's daughter's new life. As they walked home, Cora asked Simon, "How many do you think will attend the wedding?" "None." Her attention twisted to his face. "None?" "Well, not more than a couple. It's beneath them to attend the wedding of a labourer. Everett would want to attend just to dance with Lucy, but her parents will forbid it. Lady May might attend, and Sulfeld will follow her, as he would anywhere. That's it. And us." He looked at Cora with an incredulous glance. Did he doubt she wanted to go? "Then the four of us will have to have enough enjoyment for the rest." Cora wondered if Lady Atkins would attend, just to be near Simon, but decided that the woman would consider it slumming and wouldn't go. Good. The next day, and just as Simon had predicted, the only other couple to attend with them was May and Sulfeld. It suited Cora very well. Unlike formal events, it was perfectly acceptable to dance numerous times without censure, and so both couples did. Each time Simon took Cora into his arms, her body ached to stay there. As they passed by each other when the steps didn't require them to hold, Simon winked flirtatiously and incidentally touched her, causing gooseflesh to erupt from the spot. And for the 100 times he smiled at her with real enjoyment, she melted. Crap, she was in love. When they returned to their carriage to go home, Simon leaned over to Cora. "Have you considered the question I didn't get to ask?" She shook her head, then slowly made eye contact. "I don't know my own mind yet. When I do, you'll be the first to know." "Then I'll wait and hope." She reminded herself that this was why she'd stayed past when her roommates returned. She hadn't known her own mind. She still didn't. Hearing him say that he still had hope gave her a little, too. Simon handed Cora down when they arrived at Leavensfield. "Are you interested in an outing tomorrow?" "Of course. What do you have planned?" The couple walked extra slowly toward the house. "A surprise." She loved the twinkle in his gaze as he said that. "For me or for everyone at the house party?" He leaned very close to her ear and blew across her neck before saying, "Only for you." "Yes, I'm very interested in your outing. What time will we go?" "Before breakfast, so others won't join us." They ascended the steps, and the butler opened the door wide. "I'll skip my workout and meet you in the parlour." "Meet me in the stables instead. We'll be riding." At the appointed time the next morning, Cora, leaving through the kitchen door, met Simon, who must have exited through the front door, on the path to the stables. "Is our ride today to one of your favourite places on the estate as well?" "It is, and I'm predicting it will become one of yours." Cora appreciated the excitement in his voice and the gleam in his gaze. He truly enjoyed surprising her. She, in turn, liked that he wanted to. "I'm intrigued," she said. "Will you give me a hint about the place?" Simon thought for a moment, but they arrived at the stables before he answered. 2 horses were saddled and waiting. Cora reached out with one hand to greet Simon's horse, Hrimfaxi. "We met the other night, big fella," she cooed close to his face. "May I present Siti?" Cora moved to greet that horse and let him have the scent of her. "Another name from mythology. I'm sensing a trend, Simon." "It was a particular fascination for a while." They both swung into their saddles, and Simon led them northward on an ordinary, though not well-worn road. "How about that hint?" Cora reminded him. Simon nodded. "It was abandoned decades ago, but it is quite populated. It is a place of poverty, but everyone has sufficient for their needs. This place is founded on a shared past to change the future." "A riddle?" She faced him to see a growing smile. "I have absolutely no idea." "You'll have to wait and see. The road is fine today. Shall we speed up our journey a bit?" Cora nudged her horse into a lope at the same time as Simon. The ride was enjoyable as they alternated between canter, walk, trot, and back again. The scenery became increasingly remote, with few houses and fewer people wandering about. After a couple of hours, Simon guided them to a stable. "We'll leave the horses here. Our destination is just over that hill." Cora held the hem of her dress off the dirt while she accepted Simon's extended arm. Then they took off on foot. Near the rise, Cora could see the jagged crenellation on top of a great square tower. With each step they took, the building revealed itself slowly over the rise of the hill. The walls were made of the same grey stone as the tower and looked to be of ancient design. When they reached the top of the hill, Cora could see the entire building. Though not huge, it had a presence and likely a history. The slats on the roof were grown over in places with green moss, as were the flagstone walkways. "What's the name of the building?" "It's Clarenstead Abbey. The central tower is a remnant of the Roman strongholds in the area. Centuries later, the lower-level rooms and walls were added, and it became a cloister for nuns. Finally, it was liberated from religious duties by King Henry VIII, when he dissolved the monasteries in England. It became private property and was joined to the dukedom." "I'm sure there's more to the fascinating history." "There is, but that's not why we're here." The arched doorway at the front, centered at the bottom of the tower, opened as they approached. Cora's curiosity was piqued, but before she could ask more, an older couple met them. "We got your letter," the man said. Nearly over the top of his words, the woman said, "We've been waiting since early for you to arrive." Then she turned to Cora. "Welcome, welcome." "Cora, may I present Mr. and Mrs. Miller, the caretakers of the Clarenstead Abbey School?" Greetings were exchanged. Then the woman's arm rounded Cora's shoulders and pulled her alongside as they stepped into the cool interior. There was an earthy smell to the building, not like mud and not offensive, just clean earth. It was welcoming. "A school?" Cora asked. "Is it yours?" She threw a quick glance at Simon as the woman walked Cora down a short hallway with Simon following behind. "Of a sort," Simon replied. As they neared an open door, Cora recognized random sounds. Her heartbeat raced with excitement. In this century, a school for children who were typically developing would have been quiet enough to hear a pin drop. She knew these children didn't know their sounds were loud. Flashes of her own childhood and early education warmed through her. She knew the children must be deaf. "This school is the only school like it in..." Cora was no longer listening to the adults in the hallway. She whirled towards Simon with a spontaneous hug, then bustled through the door, realizing too late that she might be interrupting a lesson. A couple of children saw her and pointed. causing others to look her way. She waved and with a large smile said hello and signed, "My name is Cora." Most of the children waved back. "The children have just finished their morning chores and will have a bite to eat before lessons begin. Would you like to join them?" Mrs. Miller asked. Cora nodded as she walked into the group, settling into a chair at a large wooden table. A servant entered, carrying a tray of cookies. Biscuits, Simon would call them. The children sat at the tables as the servants began making the rounds, depositing a cookie for each child and filling little mugs with a ladle of milk. That's when Cora noticed something she hadn't expected to see. None of the children signed for the treat, nor for thanking the servants. How do they communicate? She asked Simon and the Millers, who were just joining her. Her heart constricted, suspecting they were being raised oral. In this time, that was the best they could do, hoping they assimilated into a world of voices. Mrs. Miller answered, "We are teaching them to write, but it is slow going." "All of the children are learning to read lips," Simon added. Cora knew that meant they would get every few words and guess at the rest. "I'm also a teacher. May I?" She motioned toward the servant. Simon answered, "Of course," with a puzzled look on his face. "Do the servants hear and speak?" Cora asked. "Yes," Mrs. Miller answered. Cora approached the servant. "Withhold the cookie for a moment, please." The woman looked toward the Millers, who nodded to her. Cora placed her hand flat like a plate, then with a cupped hand, touched her fingertips to her palm, turning and touching the palm again. "Biscuit," she said. Then she knelt beside a girl in a yellow dress and, with her lips at the child's eye level, repeated the sign and said, "Biscuit." Next, Cora placed the child's hand on top of hers and signed for cookie on the child's palm. Her heart was so full it seemed to climb into her throat, making it feel thick. Finally, she removed her hands and encouraged the child to sign cookie at the same time as she did. The child's hesitant motions were rewarded with a cookie. Cora smiled at the child and felt her eyes must be alight with happiness. Then she repeated the process with the next child, but by the time she got to the third, the child was enthusiastically signing before she could teach him. The rest of the children began signing for the little treat, though some needed more support than others. The happiness she felt was near to bursting in her chest. With tears in her eyes, she stood beside Simon. She watched as the servant circulated the room again, waiting for the children to sign before setting down their second biscuit. Tears brimmed in her eyes. Her hand touched her chest as her pulse raced. She had given them a word. As a teacher, she had taught many signs to children, but never before had she given a child their very first word. Her breath stuttered through her nose as she struggled to regain her composure. Her voice was barely a sigh when she finally said, "This is an amazing place." She noticed Simon's and the Miller's eyes were welling also. "What else could you teach them, miss?" Mr. Miller asked. Simon answered, "Anything is possible. They could learn to say anything." They stayed until the tables were cleaned and the lessons began. With little slates and beans as counters, they worked simple math problems, the older students helping the younger. Again, at the Abbey's entrance, Cora asked, "May I come again?" "Whenever you wish," Simon answered, then bid adieu to the caretakers. When they had gotten on their way, he asked, "If you were to say what the children were doing in their lessons, how would it look?" Cora said and signed, math and addition. Simon's hands repeated the motions. For the rest of the walk, Cora signed as she and Simon spoke. It felt liberating. It felt joyful. It felt like home. This was her first language of love, and she cherished the feeling. Once back at Leavensfield, they entered through the front door together, then went to change from their riding clothes. Refreshed but famished, Cora stepped into the green salon in time for afternoon tea. Although Simon's mother offered Cora a cup and saucer, she did so with narrowed eyes and pursed lips. Apparently, she had noticed their absence today. Simon entered a few moments later. Lady Georgia Tuttle clapped her hands with excitement. "Simon, we've decided to add a musicale to the entertainments. You approve, don't you?" asked the elder of Simon's sisters. "Oh, heavens, please, Simon, say no." "Say yes, it will be great fun." Lady Virginia Tuttle was nearly bouncing in her chair, awaiting his approval. "I would love to participate," Lady Atkins added. The dowager set her tea aside to await the answer. "What do you say, Simon? We haven't had a musicale for a couple of years. It would be a lovely evening." "Does no one in his family consider how much Simon might hate that kind of event?" "As you wish, Mother," Simon answered. Cora caught a sly glance between Virginia and Georgia before they raised their teacups to cover their lips. A moment later, Georgia settled her cup on the table and stood. "I was hoping you would allow it. I've made a game of choosing instruments." She picked up a silver bowl from the hearth. "I've placed the names of several instruments in the bowl. Whichever you choose, you play. We will each have 3 days to practice, and then we'll perform for the house guests." She placed the bowl within the reach of each lady in attendance. May declined to play, claiming it would likely ruin the evening. After each pulled out a slip of paper, Georgia announced she would play the violin, Virginia the piano, and Lady Atkins the piano also. Simon's mother refused to play an instrument, but offered to sing if another guest would accompany her. When the bowl came to Cora, several papers were folded at the bottom. She wondered which other instruments were in the music room at Simon's house. 3 days wasn't nearly enough time if she drew an instrument she didn't know, especially with the standards she ruthlessly held herself to. Still, everyone drawing a slip had taken that chance. She wouldn't cower from it either. She chose a paper and unfolded it. "Harp," she read aloud. Simon's mother raised her eyebrows and stared at his sisters, who dropped their heads as if to cover their smiles. Simon looked likewise surprised. "Well, 3 days," Virginia repeated, hurrying to put the bowl away on the hearth. "I'll have the other women choose when I see them later today." "I'm looking forward to the performances," Lady Atkins added. "When may I use your music room, Simon? I'll need a little practice to brush up a new piece I've learned." "I'll post a schedule after the other women have chosen," Georgia said. When the family gathered for dinner that night, Georgia announced that the schedule was posted. Simon's mother said that Lucy and her mother would play a duet with a violin and viola, and another guest would play the flute. Cora was relieved she hadn't pulled that slip of paper, but the woman didn't seem nervous at all. Cora spent as much time as she could at the school. It was convenient that her practice time was scheduled around the same time the gentlemen joined the ladies in the parlour after dinner. Yes, how convenient. Not. Still, she enjoyed the uninterrupted time during the day to go to the school. She loved how quickly the students were picking up the signs, and she carried her happiness back with her to Leavensfield. One evening, before she entered the family dining room, she heard her name and stopped before entering. Out of sight, she heard Simon's mother and Lady Atkins discussing her. The nerve! She debated between entering and disrupting them and waiting to hear what they were saying. Eavesdropping won. Simon's mother was speaking. "That Cora person is an unwelcome guest in my home, while you are like family to me. She should leave, not you." Lady Atkins answered. "Your son seems to think she is welcome." "She's a novelty, an American. They have no culture, no history, no refinement." The dowager harumphed. "His fascination with her will wane like a child's when his toy becomes old." "I have no intention of waiting for her to become old." "Don't worry. She's only after his money or his title." "That's rich. She's speaking to the one person that would be true of and doesn't even realize it." His mother continued. "There can never be an honourable relationship between them. He can't marry her. He won't be willing to be a social outcast. He understands his duty to the title. We'll give it a little nudge, and he'll abandon her." What? Neither woman seemed to know Simon at all. Her appetite was gone, especially if it meant sharing a room with these women. She spun on her heels. Maybe a second session of a workout would do her some good. Several steps away, she stopped again. No, She'd rather enjoy a breakfast where their conversation was stifled by her presence. She turned back, but the two women exited the breakfast room before she got there and walked her way. Kill them with kindness. But when the women were within a few steps, both of them turned their faces to the wall and refused to meet her gaze as they walked by. "Good morning," she said brightly, anyway. After a quick breakfast, she left Leavensfield, intending to stay away most of the day. She almost wished she'd gone to London with Lucy and May to shop for Lucy's wedding, but she had wanted to be near Simon whenever possible. Since he spent so much time with matters of the estate, she often went to the children's school without him. In the evenings after dinner, she practiced in the music room or did kickboxing, then took walks outside before retiring. That night, she heard Simon's mother speaking to Wetheridge. "If you marry the girl, your problems as well as mine will be solved. Take her across the border and marry her. Soon." Should she tell Simon? He'd been worried about his sister's interest in Wetheridge, and it seemed that now his mother was involved too. He would want to protect his sister, though Cora believed his sister would welcome it, and with her mother's blessing, there might not be much Simon could do to stop it. Really, what would she say? "I heard your mother say this, but I don't know who it was about, but it might be your sister." That was worse than gossip. The third day, she spent more time at the school. The children greeted her enthusiastically, embracing each sign she showed them. Teaching was its own reward, and this was unlike any teaching experience she'd had. These children needed her desperately. They had no language. Well, not exactly. They were learning to read lips as a way to take part in someone else's language. Signing could give them their own. Simon was going to be back the next day. She'd missed him so much. She wanted him to see the children's progress as well. As she joined the guests in the salon before dinner, Simon's mother stood in the middle of the room, but began walking in her direction. Within a step, she whispered, "Oh, are you still here? Take your place at the end of the line." Then she faced the centre of the room and spoke to the other guests. "Dinner is being served." The guests ordered themselves by precedence and filed out. The numbers were uneven, and Cora was unescorted, as was Lucy, since Everett wasn't expected back until the next day. Cora extended her arm to her friend, and they accompanied each other through the doorway. Wetheridge met them in the hall, having joined the group late. "As luck would have it, it's my pleasure to attend two beautiful women for supper." He bowed and led them behind the group. It was a kind gesture. Cora hadn't expected Wetheridge to be chivalrous, but was pleasantly surprised.